All right, so we can go ahead and get things started. On behalf of Drexel's Neuroscience Graduate Students for Diversity Group, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. My name is Nancy Mack, and I'll be the host of today's webinar. Today, we're here to discuss anything and everything about applying to graduate school in STEM fields. Throughout the presentation, we invite you to submit questions using the Q&A feature, and at the end of this presentation, we'll introduce you to our panelists and chat about your questions. I would now like to hand it over to Taylor, who will be our presenter today.
I'm Taylor McCorkle, and I'm a third-year PhD student at Drexel's neuroscience program, and I'm also the vice president of NGSD. And we're really glad to have you guys here today, and we'll be talking about, applying to graduate school in STEM fields. And I'm actually on the admissions and recruitment committee for our neuroscience program. So please feel free to ask many questions during this talk. And just to give you a little bit of my perspective and background, so I did my undergraduate at the University of Pennsylvania, where I majored in biology and minored in psychology. And I applied to graduate school in the fall of my senior year. And I actually only applied to Drexel, which I don't recommend doing. I just really wanted to be mentored by my specific PI, and I really liked his research. So therefore, I kind of just took a risk, which thankfully paid off. Okay, so next slide. So just to give you guys a little background on NGSD, it stands for Neuroscience Graduate Students for Diversity. We were founded this summer, actually in 2020, and it consists of graduate students, most of whom are from the neuroscience department at Drexel, but we also have students from the microbiology and immunology department, as well as neuroscience students from like Penn and other local schools. So we've really been gaining momentum over the past few months. And we're basically working to create a more inclusive environment at Drexel and to increase diversity in STEM fields and to simply provide resources and opportunities for historically excluded minority students. And feel free to reach out to us. We have, Instagram and Twitter accounts, as you can see in the slides there. Okay, so today we have a couple goals that we will be addressing. So we'll be talking about, how to know where to apply, application contents and a general timeline, as well as tips and tricks for essays, recommendation letters, and CVs. Next. Okay, so first things first, what you want to do is pick a topic. So you can pick by specialty. So specialties include like neuroscience, immunology, biology, etc. You can apply to more than one type of program. So we have people who apply to like psychology and neuroscience programs. And like I mentioned earlier, I don't recommend only applying to one school like I did. My parents were actually really upset with me because I obviously didn't have any options. So it's smart to kind of create a list of schools that you're interested in applying to, maybe like 15 of them, and then start to narrow that list and think about applying to like 10 or so programs. There are interdisciplinary programs, so like a biomedical PhD interdisciplinary program where you have like general coursework, and then after a year or two of that, you break off and join a lab. This is good if you're not sure exactly what you want to do, you're not set on a specialty yet. It's not the classical framework, but it does exist. And if you do have an interest in going this route, we can help you find more information about it. And lastly, it's okay to start grad school in something completely new. I know this may sound weird, but you don't need to, have the exact degree or the research experience in order to get into some of these programs. So next, please. Okay, so now we're searching for programs. So what are we trying to look for? First things first, research environment. So what is it like? What is the reputation of the program? What kinds of research labs are available to you? What kinds of publications do they have, and how recent are these publications? What do the students say about the place? PIs really and truly do not mind the cold call sort of email situation. I did this with my current PI when I was a senior in college. I basically said, hey, I don't know much about grad school, but I looked you up and your research is exactly what I want to do. So I sent him my CV and basically asked if we could chat more about Drexel's program and if I could also talk to a potential student. And when I talked to him, I immediately felt good vibes and was like, this is where I want to be. So that can take more of your time, but it's very useful in truly getting a sense of the environment that you'll be in. And next we have tuition and stipends. So this varies from program to program, and all of this info should be on the program website. But essentially, PhD students get stipends, so they're paid. And for us at Drexel and for most grad programs through a College of Medicine, you are paid for your lab research. So you don't have to do anything else. There are opportunities for you to get teaching experience, but this is more of a thing that you seek out and like do as an extracurricular. However, the biology PhD program at Drexel is through the graduate college, and their stipend comes from teaching. So this is an important point. If you're set on becoming a professor, then this teaching experience can be very valuable to you. But if not, then maybe you're not concerned about having to teach. Also, it's important to know if your program guarantees your stipend for your entire time. Um, for example, a PI is constantly applying for funding opportunities, and there are times when funding can potentially fall through, unfortunately. And at Drexel, if this happens, the chair of the department will still pay your stipend, even if your PI cannot, so that you're guaranteed to, still be paid and still be in the program. Also, Drexel does not require you to pay tuition at all as a PhD student. So your stipend is used for like stuff like rent or like bills that you have to pay. However, some programs give you a stipend and also require you to pay tuition. So all of this is just important to know. And then in terms of coursework, even within the field of neuroscience itself, many programs differ widely in their course requirements and structures. So this is an important thing to look at when comparing different programs because you may be interested or not in specific topics, then you just kind of want to know what is provided. And application fee waiver. So applying to grad school can be expensive, but it doesn't have to be. Almost every program will hand out an application fee waiver, even if you don't see the information about this on their website. And Drexel is a perfect example of this. So it's very easy to get a fee waiver, but it doesn't say anything about how to do that on the website. So if you don't see any information, you just want to reach out to the program chair or literally any professor, PI within the program, and they will get you in contact with the right people. And then lastly, we have open houses. So many programs have these in the months kind of leading up to application due dates. These can be a great opportunity to talk to other professors and also students in the program for you to, and you can ask all of your questions. And these can be an especially helpful way to check out programs now, given that they are virtual due to COVID. So next. Okay, so now we're going to transition into talking about the actual contents in your application. So this includes like your transcript, the GRE, your CV, letters of rec, personal statements, and supplemental essays, which are less common, but we will touch on those. And so transcripts are kind of self-explanatory. So graduate schools require that you send a copy from your undergraduate institution. And please note that if you're asked to provide an official transcript, this will most likely cost money. So just pay attention to if schools specifically ask for official transcripts, which I think most do, or if they say that unofficial transcripts are okay. Next, please. Okay, so now we have the GRE, which stands for Graduate Record Examinations. This consists of three parts, which include verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and analytical writing. There are two sections for each of these, and the exam takes approximately 3 hours. So many programs are actually moving away from this requirement because a lot of people are starting to realize that standardized tests don't capture the full intellectual abilities of students, right? Um, However, if the program you apply to does require it, you will most likely just take it online at your home due to COVID currently. And there are fee waivers that you can apply for through the ets.org GRE website because it does cost money to take the test. If you do take the test and you want to give yourself a few months to study properly beforehand. So there's resources available to study with, such as tutors through your undergraduate institutions, and also practice books that you can get through like Amazon, or even current graduate students that might still have those books. And also your GRE scores are good for 5 years, which is good as well. So next. Okay, now to talk about the CV. So this differs from a resume in that there are no page limits. And you also really want to showcase your credentials. So CVs are used to apply for academic roles, and they're a comprehensive description of the course of your academic and professional accomplishments. Whereas a resume is more of a summary of your career history and skills. There's no singular format for the CV, which can make it tricky. However, Microsoft Word has a good template. And you also want to remember to cater your format to showcase your strengths. So typically a CV will include your research experience, so any project you've been on or time that you've spent as a research assistant, or whatever it may be. And then you have professional experience, which can include like conferences you attended, or internships that don't necessarily fall under like the research category. And then there's honors and awards, which could be things you've received from a club you're in, a special awards from a sports team, awards from science competitions, anything that you've won and were given that is relevant in showcasing your potential. Memberships and affiliations. So are you part of a scientific organization, a club, a sports team, sorority, fraternity, and then for relevant coursework. So this can be used especially if you're applying to a science program, but you don't have a degree in like a hard science field. It's nice to just highlight science courses that you've taken, or even math courses, just to emphasize that you are knowledgeable in these subjects. And lastly, you can add a section for community service or extracurriculars if you have content to add to these sections. So for me, I did a lot of community service in undergrad, so I added this as well as extracurriculars because I ran track in college. And adding this is just beneficial for the holistic review of your application. And there are many ways to get help with your CV. So I know undergrads, institutions, they usually have like workshops for this kind of stuff. So you can look out for that, or simply ask one of your professors or one of your peers to look over it for you and give their comments. So next. Okay, so now we have letters of recommendation. So you definitely want to ask early. You want to set reminders for yourself and the professor. Professors will most likely tell you to remind them, but if they don't, make sure to like send follow-up emails. With their busy schedules, it's just easy for emails to like unintentionally fall through the cracks. So don't feel like you are like badgering them or bothering them in any way, definitely remind them. Also, it's likely that professors are writing letters for multiple students and that you may need them to submit the same letter to multiple programs. So you want to give them ample time for that. I think I gave my professor a couple of months to write mine. So 3 recommendations are pretty standard. And the next point is important. So no one person can write a letter about all of your amazing attributes. So it's important to diversify these letters to get people who really know about the different sides of you. For example, you ideally want professors who are in or related to the field that you're applying to. So like a professor of one of your science classes or a research supervisor. And in these instances, it's important to take the time and really build like good relationships with them. So um, attend office hours or talk to them after class just so they begin to know you a little more. And then when you ask them for a letter, it's important to be professional and to clearly communicate, the programs that you're applying to and your career goals. You will also want to send them your CV and maybe even your personal statement, even if it's still a draft, just so they have a clearer idea of everything that you do. And also, pro tip, by sending them your CV, um, they're giving somebody else the chance to look over it, and they could send edits if they have certain things to say about it, which can be helpful. Also, there are often times when there's a non-science person who can really speak on your attributes as a person. I know that I asked my college track coach to write one of my recommendations because she knew me the best throughout college, and I obviously spent the most time with her. And she could speak to like my commitment, my passion, my determination better than any of my professors could. Um, so also think about that. And then with the last point, the verification of blind recommendations. Blind recommendations is something that you check on the application, basically that you as the applicant have not read any of these letters of recommendations. Um, and when people write these letters, they typically upload them themselves. So usually somewhere in the application, there's a place to add a recommender where you submit like your professor's email and they are sent a link with instructions to how to upload the letter. So next. Okay, so now onto the personal statement. So this is a very unique part of the application where people are not necessarily looking for, cookie cutter format. They're really looking for you to stand out here. And you really just want to brag about yourself in this personal statement. You want to clearly communicate why you want to go to grad school. So what your research interests are, which labs in the program you're interested in working in. This can be really good to show that you've like clearly done your research for each program, but don't forget to like go back and change this part if you do submit basically the same personal statement to multiple programs. You want to be very careful about that. Um, and you also want to convey, why you're passionate about research, like what motivates you and inspires you to pursue it. I know in mine, I study traumatic brain injuries, and I talked in mine about a concussion I had gotten playing sports and how that basically motivated me to study traumatic brain injuries. And you also want to talk about why the program is good for you. So, is it their reputation, like their mentoring style, the research that is available to you, their collaborative environment, and then also why you're a good fit for them? So, what skills do you have that will make you successful in the program? And while you're bragging about yourself, it's also important to make this essay one of reflection and also talk about hardships that you may have faced that influence potential weaknesses of your application. So for me personally, I had gotten some C's in like particular science classes. And I talked about, the part-time jobs that I had to work throughout college, the fact that I was an athlete basically all year round for all 4 years and stuff like that. So it's important to really display the real you and show all the things that you were great at while also acknowledging like potential weaknesses. but use these to show how you're even more prepared for grad school because of how you've pushed through and overcome these barriers. Historically, it's thought that admissions committees simply look at your grades and your test scores, and this concept is changing, and committees are really doing a more holistic review of applicants. So it's important to really convey your true self. Some programs have supplemental essays where they clearly state that this essay can be written on like potential barriers you face through college. Um, However, I know Drexel, for instance, just expects that this would be in the personal statement. Um, so you just want to be cognizant of that and don't solely think that the personal statement is for you to just talk about your like research, like basically a paragraph version of your CV sort of thing. You really want to get more personal with it. Also, Drexel does not have a word limit on these statements. So you don't want to make it too long, obviously. You want to make it like a page and a half, but definitely look out for other programs to see if they do have word limits. And you really want to have multiple people read this and help you edit it. So there's numerous writing centers or workshops you can attend to help out. And also you're free to reach out to me. So I actually just read over a person's personal statement last night. I'm definitely willing to help out in whatever ways that I can for you on this journey. So next. So here's a general timeline for applications and interviews. One thing to be aware of with interviews is say that you apply to a bunch of schools and they all want you to interview, right? Which is great. Likely the chances are that all of these schools are not going to be local and you'll have to travel for interviews. It's important to note that while you do get reimbursed for your travel most times, you will most likely have to pay up front. This is where something like having a credit card can be really handy so that you can use that to pay for the travel and then pay your statement with the reimbursement money. Kind of a blessing in disguise, I guess, of this pandemic is the fact that these interviews will be conducted over Zoom. So we won't have to worry about that right now, but that's definitely something to keep in mind. And next. So thank you guys for listening. Please feel free to type any questions that you have. And just know that we will be making these slides available to you. And also thank you for dealing with the technical issues at the beginning of all of this. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Taylor, so much. That was an amazing presentation. And I want to again reiterate, thank you all for hanging in there through our technical issues. So before we start answering some of the questions that are coming in, I want to give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll go ahead and get started with questions. So I'm going to go ahead and start. So as I mentioned in the beginning, my name is Nancy. I'm a fourth-year neuroscience PhD student in Drexel's neuroscience program. And I applied to graduate school during my undergraduate at James Madison University, where I was majoring in psychology and minoring in biochemistry and molecular biology. And so I have experience applying to graduate school kind of in that time frame, and also applying to numerous different PhD programs. And so I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have about that. So Michaela, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself next?
Sure. Hi guys, my name is Michaela. I am also a fourth year neuroscience PhD student. I study how your immune system reacts after spinal cord injury, but it was a very long and windy journey just to get to this thesis project. And it's, I guess, where, I never really knew where I wanted to go with STEM, but I kind of always had an interest in neuroscience, and that was what led me to undergrad in pursuing my degree in neuroscience. And then from there, trying to figure out how to apply to grad school and maintain this and where I can go with a career. Don't know what else to say or mention, but yeah.
Thanks, Michaela. Christina, do you want to go ahead and go next?
Sure. So my name is Christina Coronel Farrow, and I'm a first year. It's my first semester in the neuro program at Drexel. I applied the last year of my master's, and I got my master's at Rutgers Camden in biology with a concentration of neuro. So I'm like fresh in the game, basically. But yeah, it's difficult, but you will get through it. The applications are confusing, but there's so many people willing to help. You just have to reach out.
Kyle, do you want to go ahead and wrap us up?
All right, so hey guys, my name is Kyle Sampson, and I'm a little bit like non-traditional compared to everybody else. So I'm in the dual MD and PhD program. So I started with medical school a few years ago, and then I'm now in the same year as Taylor. So I'm in my second year of the graduate school doing research in neuroscience. And I'm from Buffalo, New York. I studied biology there, and my senior year I applied to the medical school, and then I ended up transferring into the like graduate neuroscience program that I'm in now.
Thanks, Kyle. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just start off with some of the questions that we've been getting. So one question is, when do people typically take the GRE? And I know that from this panel, we have some people who've taken it at different times. So I'm going to go ahead and see if Michaela wants to start us off with that.
Sure, yeah. So for me, I think that when you choose to take the GREs, it's very dependent on when you're also kind of trying to attend grad school, and what works well for you and your plan. And so for me, I knew I wanted to get testing accommodations for my GRE because I actually have ADHD. And I knew I also wanted to get a fee waiver, and all of that stuff tends to take time and paperwork and energy. And on top of that, it's really good if you can to try to take the GRE at least twice, so that way you have the one time where you can get your nerves and your energy out, make the mistakes you need, and then the second time. And what's nice with that is that you can kind of cherry pick which scores you want to send to schools as well. So that's why it's encouraged to take it at least twice. And so that's where you kind of want to plan it out, where if you know that you maybe need to file extra paperwork just to take the GRE, or if you know that you want to take it twice, you'll want to really start planning far enough in advance and devote a solid amount of time towards studying, and then a solid amount of time to taking the exam, getting your scores back, restudying what you kind of need to study, and then trying to take it again in enough time before applications are due. So it's a very personal decision, I think, but it's one of those things where it just kind of requires you sitting down with a calendar and just mapping it all out.
I want to see if Taylor or Christina have anything to add about that.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit on it. I think, so for me, I only took the GRE once. It definitely is a personal decision. I think standardized tests just really stressed me out. So I was like, just hoping and praying that my score would be like good enough, I guess, for me to only have to take it one time. But I think, so I applied to grad school late, like sometime towards the end of the application period, but I actually had taken the GRE like over the summer prior to my senior year. And what I did, I gave myself like many months to study for it, because I knew the first few months would I would actually not be studying for it. It's like me gearing up to really get into it, because it is something that you kind of have to commit to. And I got a tutor through my undergrad, and basically worked with her like at nights essentially, to prepare for the GRE, and then I took it. I actually didn't know about the GRE fee waivers, so that is something that can be really important, especially if you like take it more than one time. So definitely look out for that and keep that in mind.
So I have like examples like what you're not supposed to do, because I took it during the fall of the last year, which I like, that's like normally when you're like wrapping everything up, thinking about graduation, everything like that. Was not able to dedicate as much time due to financial constraints. Like I could not afford the tutoring, so I had the book. So the book's relatively cheap. So in hindsight, I would say do it in the summer, even though you want to take that break. That's like really the free mental time from your coursework to dedicate to that and give that time, because I And I didn't take it a second time. I waited too late. Everything was condensed. It was like, everything's hitting me at once. So I would definitely suggest doing it in the summer where you have more free time to focus on just that.
Before we move on to our next question, I just want to point out to the attendees. So we dropped in the chat box, you should see a link to a Google Doc. And some neuroscientists have compiled a list of all of the currently known graduate programs that they know of that don't require the GRE. So I really encourage you guys to check out that list, because a lot of programs are moving away from this requirement. And so you can, potentially save yourself from that if you're interested in some of these programs. And another thing, sorry. I was just going to say, another thing I wanted to point out is that when I took the GRE, at the time, at the end of the test, they will ask you if you want to send your scores anywhere, and they will send your scores, I think, to 3 places for free. And after that, you have to pay for that. So it will behoove you going in to maybe know of 3 programs that you are interested in applying to, because that's a great free opportunity to take advantage of. Did you want to say something else, Michaela?
Yeah, just quickly before we move on to the next question, make sure if you're going to take the GRE, sign up for those free GRE questions. They'll send you also, there are like free essay questions that have been used in the past. And I'm not going to lie, I actually got several of the math questions on my GRE. So I actually knew the answer without having to do the math because I had practice. And then I actually got one of my essay questions was one of the practice questions that I had done. So I really encourage like looking up on websites using the free like GRE question of the day, and then also like the various websites that have past questions, and going through them as much as you can. And it's all about strategy, not so much like your knowledge base. It's really just like how you take the test. So sign up for those.
Thanks, Michaela. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next question. So what are some careers that you plan to obtain after graduating from graduate school? I'm going to let Kyle kick off this question.
Yeah, so for me, it's a little bit different, but there's really like a lot of variability depending a lot on just kind of like what you want to get out of like your PhD, right? Or your master's and that sort of thing. So I think for some people, they go in knowing exactly what they want to do. They want to stick with the science, they want to stick with the academia, and they want to say, keep a lab, have a lab, and that sort of thing. When others go an alternative route where they don't want to really have a lab, but they still want to do the science. So they might go somewhere more like industry. And at the same time, a lot of people come in maybe not knowing or thinking they want to go one of those routes. And then throughout the process, that changes. And then it might change again. And you know what I mean? And I think, Michaela and Nancy being a little further along can speak to that personally, or like their colleagues that are as far along as they are. But yeah, for me, I guess like just personally, I'm still like deciding that. So like I'm still relatively new, at least I feel that way. So like I don't have a definitive answer. And I think that's something that's like normal. So like at the stage that you are all at, like if you have no idea, that's the expectation. And if you don't, that's great, that's amazing. But then again, it might change. So I think like, yeah.
Michaela, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Yeah, as I guess a 4th year, I kind of feel like every single year my career aspirations have changed. I came into grad school and I was like, oh, I love doing bench work. I just love like, doing surgeries and doing the science. And then I wanted to go into industry because then I knew I could just keep doing bench work and get paid a ton of money. And then as I've continued, I was like, I actually really prefer kind of coming up with the ideas and the mechanisms and figuring that out. So over the years, your interests are going to shift, especially as you're like learning so much. So I think Kyle really summed it up. It's like I came in with one idea and expectation, and now I'm kind of at the point where I have no idea what I want. And there are so many routes that you can go, whether it's industry, academia, government, public health, policy. There's so many areas. And so that's one of those things now, I think for Nancy and I, as we're moving on into our 5th year next year, oh God, we'll have to start figuring that out. Oh, but also,
No, you're good.
last thing, sorry. Even if there's nothing that is super static about your career, because even if I choose to go into industry when I graduate, you can still decide, oh, actually, I want to now try government. And there's a lot of mobility. So it's never like a hard and set course either.
I can give my spiel, but does anyone else want to jump in there first?
I'll just jump in quickly. I think I'm like the complete opposite. So like I always knew that I wanted to like study traumatic brain injuries, and basically since like the high school, I knew that I wanted to figure out like how to create like come up with better like therapies for like the post concussive like behavioral deficits. And so for me, it was just a whole situation of kind of like figuring it out. So like I know what I want to do, but like how do I get there? And like what does that mean like career wise? And it was just this whole situation where I had no idea um, about like grad school in neuroscience at all. I was like Googling stuff. Um, and so now I think through this whole process of grad school, it's like further cementing like, okay, now I really know like exactly what I can do and like what career I can go into and exactly how that plays into this kind of passion that I've had for most of my life. And I think that's another one of the cool things about grad school is that it really like opens your eyes to understanding that, oh, like I can do exactly like what I've been wanting to do but didn't have a name for it, sort of thing. So for me, I've been pretty set on like going into industry and working for like a pharmaceutical or a biotech sort of company. um, and that's kind of like where my perspective is coming from. So
Okay, so I'll go ahead and wrap this one up. So for me, when I applied to graduate school, I think at the time I really wanted to be a professor. Um, and just for some like additional background, I went to a small like liberal arts college that didn't have graduate students. So I was fortunate to get research experience, but it was all very driven at the undergraduate level in a much smaller capacity than the type of work we do, at Drexel College of Medicine, which is called an R1 research university. And what that different universities are distinguished by R1 or R2 or perhaps not ranked at all, essentially by how much money that university brings in to do research. And so similar to what Michaela said, I think as my time has gone on in graduate school, I keep kind of switching what my career trajectory looks like. What I have stayed consistent in is I am very passionate about making a difference in the field of mental health. And where I can't decide where I want my impact to be is on the kind of like Taylor said, like if I'm really interested in moving treatment options forward, like I want to directly be involved in the team that's going to get patients, the next therapeutic target that's going to improve their lives, then perhaps industry might be a better route for me if that's going to be my goal. If I'm passionate about mental health, and that means recruiting the next generation of neuroscientists who didn't know what neuroscience was before they entered my classroom, and kind of uplifting and teaching people about the science behind mental health as a professor, then that would also, I think, achieve that goal. And then thirdly, another thing I think about a lot is science communication. And I think in the field of mental health, that's really important too. So we can make such a difference in destigmatizing mental health if we just maybe communicate it better and talk about it more. And so there are careers in science communication that can kind of help me obtain that. So those are kind of three different, I think, career paths of where my head is at. But I think they are all driven by the same underlying goal. And I feel confident obtaining a PhD in neuroscience because there are so many different skills that you gain throughout the process. Yes, bench work, I've learned, looking throughout my journey, I've learned so many techniques and like research skills that I didn't know before I came here, but I've also grown a lot in other skills too. And so I don't think that you should maybe be deterred from obtaining a PhD or going for a master's if you're unsure about a career as a bench scientist, because I think there are a lot of benefits to having an intensive research program that serve beyond research, if that makes sense. So that was my long-winded spiel about that. Now I can move us on to the next question. So this one is to Christina directly, and I'm also going to loop Taylor into this because she can have something to say about this too. So Christina and Taylor, what was your reason for pursuing a master's before a PhD, and what do you feel like you got out of your master's that's kind of helping you be successful now? You want to start off, Christina?
Sure. So my bachelor's was a BS in biology. So I started research my senior year as a capstone in a neurophysiology lab. So that's when I really found my passion. I was like, oh my God, I love this. I ended up doing a master's because neuroscience is a competitive field. So that would actually give me some skills being in a lab, completing my own project and a thesis. Also, research is a lifestyle. So I figured out, like, is this really what drives me? Is this what moves me? Is this where I want to go? Do I want to make this commitment? And also, it was more neuro-focused, my master's. So therefore, I made sure this is what I want to do. Was it worth it? Did I gain a lot of skills? Yes, definitely. I know for me, it's a very individual thing, depending what your undergrad program was like, but for me, it really exposed me to that academic research world.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. So my path was I did the master's neuroscience program at Drexel, and then I transitioned into the PhD program, PhD neuroscience program at Drexel. And so for me, like the reason why I started with the master's is just because, like Christina said, it's a very competitive field and I just like wasn't ready. So like, it wasn't until literally the end of college that it clicked, like what I had been, striving to do my whole life as a career goal, that was like rooted in like neuroscience. And so I kind of just majored in general biology, hoping that I would have like all the classes I could need to take for whatever program I eventually would apply to, but I really didn't know. And in terms of my research experience, I did a lot of like more clinical stuff and not like basic science research. So I didn't have a lot of the skills that you like would be helpful when going into like a PhD program in neuroscience. And like I said, like I kind of like cold called, like emailed the my current PI, and I basically told him like, I don't know much about neuroscience, but I think that it is what I need to do in order to get where I want to be in my life. And I basically asked him, like what can I do that will take the least time and like not have me in school like for the rest of my life. Because like higher education, it's a lot of years that you are committing to reach this certain career path that you want to be in. And the one thing I really liked about Drexel was that I could go in as a master's student and just transition right into the PhD program. So it's 5 years like total. So I don't have like these 2 years of being a master's student. And then when I transition, it's like a complete restart where it's like a 5-year PhD program. And that's something that like really appealed to me, that when I transferred into the PhD program, now I'm a 3rd-year PhD candidate. And so that is one of the reasons why I was like, okay, like I definitely am going to do the master's, because they really do take the time to teach you everything and really help cultivate like your knowledge and your love for neuroscience specifically, or whatever program you decide to go into. And I think that's such a great thing when you might not, have that experience beforehand. So.
So I think what you guys both, kind of touched on is, and something I want to point out is that, PhD programs do tend to emphasize your research experience as an important component. And the reason that is because they're paying you a stipend often. So like, as Taylor really nicely said in her presentation, sometimes that stipend comes from different places. For College of Medicine students like ourselves, our stipend comes from being a research assistant. So they're paying us to do research. And so from their standpoint, they want to know what, to people who they're giving offers to, that you are committed to research and that you enjoy it and it's something that you want to do. It's because they're kind of looking at it as an investment type purpose. And so often people do masters to get better research experience in the field that they're interested in. And I just want to quickly give a plug for our talk next Thursday, because our that entire panel will be dedicated to talking about various ways that you can get research experience. Because I know that Michaela and myself are both fortunate to both do a decent amount of research as undergraduate students, and sometimes that helps with applying, from undergraduate directly to the PhD. And so. Another question, okay, I like this one for Kyle. One of our audience members would like to know why you decided to pursue an MD PhD rather than just one or the other. That's a great question.
Yeah, so great question. So my path was, it was maybe like sophomore or junior year is when I decided that I wanted to apply to medical school and go that route. And I was doing research, like bench work, and I really, really loved the research side of it. But I felt like I didn't want to just do research. So I thought that I would just do the medicine. And then so I did transfer. So I got into the medical program and then I transferred to the dual program. And the reality was, like, it's just so competitive and there's so few spots for like the dual degree that I wasn't competitive enough, and that's how I felt. So I just applied to the medical program, and there were opportunities for research, and I thought that that would be sufficient for me. And kind of similar to Nancy, like my cornerstone or whatever you want to call it is substance use disorder. So I knew that I would be working somewhere in that realm, and I thought that just medical school would be enough. I could volunteer in clinics, and that's what I did. But I realized that it wasn't enough for me. So I was able to volunteer a lot of my time in clinics during my first years of medical school. And I really was making an impact, but I wanted to do more, kind of like what Nancy said. It's I want to push the next generation of treatments. And like Taylor said that as well with traumatic brain injury. So then I looked into how to transfer, and the majority of programs accept transfers from the MD to the MD PhD or the DO to the DO PhD. But yeah, the reality was I guess it just wasn't enough for me to just it sounds terrible, but just be treating patients and just be there as the physician or that type of medical side, because the research adds the next level, right? It adds more layers to it.
Yeah, that's great. I was initially, just to carry on that, I was initially interested in actually being a neurologist. And yeah, so when I kind of had that passion for neuroscience, I think like a lot of students do, they think, what do I get an MD? Do I get a PhD? And I think I was just really fortunate enough to stumble, into a research opportunity early in my undergrad career and realize how much I enjoyed that aspect of it, and kind of answering those unknown questions and really trying to figure out what's going on and pushing the field forward. So I think all of us, think research is really exciting. So something Taylor mentioned that I think a lot of people have questions about, and I want our panel to talk about a little bit, is some students are nervous about cold emailing professors they've never spoken to. So what advice do you guys have, or personal experiences with emailing professors, at schools you've never heard of, and what advice would you give to any of our panelists who might be nervous about this?
Well,
yes, perfect. I was going to
did
pick you.
Sorry. That was my strategy, because obviously applying to grad school can get expensive and everybody's finances are different. different, whether your personal life's different, right? Financially. So I had a limited amount of schools that I could apply for. So I ended up going to a lot of local conferences. I actually was lucky enough to go to SFN. I networked there. I met PIs there. I followed up with them. I was able to visit schools, which was really hard right now, but you could probably do virtual open houses, like talk, ask the questions. Like they tend to remember your face, give you, hey, I have a colleague that actually is doing some type of research you're interested in. Why don't you email? I would actually email them, like any type of door. I was emailing very professional emails, double checking with like committee members. Does this sound professional enough? It was a lot of work and it really did pay off. But I would just definitely say like any type of opportunity, like really do grab it and do that 110% follow-up emails. If somebody's offering you an opportunity, take it.
Yeah, I guess I'll just go off of that a little bit. I think it definitely is important to really take the time to like craft a professional email and really convey, what you're trying to do, what you're interested in, like why you're even emailing that specific person, just to kind of show that, you did take the time to really do your research. And I think honestly, like just be yourself and trust that these PIs, like these professors, they really are here to help you, and they do want to recruit like students to their program. And even if you don't go to their specific program, like they do want to help kind of the next generation of scientists. And I think one thing that's really important is to definitely follow up. So like if you email somebody and they email you back, like you want to keep that line of communication going. And even if you email someone and you don't end up going to their program, like you want to like clearly like end that like line of communication. You don't just want to like fall off or something, because then that looks bad. You want to thank them for their time, whatever, like tell them that you like have applied, sort of thing. And it's just like something that you have to commit to and just have confidence in, and really take the time, because it lets them know like who you are, like Christina said, and it can really open so many doors for you, just by like contacting them. And also it can help you get in touch with students whose perspectives are really important in terms of how the atmosphere environment is really like at potential grad school. So that's also very useful.
I think Taylor just hit on so many important points all at once. And I just kind of wanted to feed off of that a little, because for me, when I was applying to grad school, I did not email. And it is still one of my biggest regrets. Like I should have emailed more. And I was so afraid of like being a bother or like just going, and I was just afraid. I was like, oh, they don't want to hear from me. Nobody cares. And then I kind of realized now, especially like the professors, PIs, they really don't mind. They do want to see you succeed. They want to hear from you, because then that also helps you stand out when it comes to the actual application. They might be like, oh, I remember your email. And especially like even reaching out to students, because I've had various emails from people specifically to me, just curious about the lab that I'm in and what that entails, like what our work entails and what the environment is like. But then also like I've seen emails that go the wrong way. So I just want to emphasize being professional and courteous and polite, because you don't want to say like, I'm sorry to bother, but you do want to say like, thank you for your time. Like, I appreciate your response, etc. And I think that's like the key point is don't let shyness or fear hold you back. And then also just make sure you're really kind of crafting it to be professional and courteous, etc.
I do want to add one more thing that you touched on about your emails. Also, you don't want to send an email that's too generic, right? So, like, definitely if you're contacting somebody, take the time to research their lab, their actual research? How would it align with your interests? You need to identify your interests to be able to do that. So that's something that's like more introspective. But you don't want to sound too generic. You want to put some time in whoever, like researching whoever you're emailing.
And then if you don't hear back in like a couple of days, like give it some time, give it a little bit of time. But then if you still don't hear back in a couple of days, just send that follow up, because they don't like hate you. They're gonna respond. It's more just like, usually sometimes you'll think like, okay, I'm gonna get back to that email, and then other things happen. So especially for PIs. So definitely follow up.
Yeah, that was really, really great advice, guys. I remember my biggest fear was like, just like Michaela said, that they might be like annoyed by me, or like they don't like, why would they open my email? They don't know who I am, like, that kind of thing. But I can tell you, like, my PI personally is so flattered anytime a student, he gets so excited and like forwards me the email. We've Zoomed with 2 potential applicants already for this application season. He'll probably copy me on the email and say, let's set up a Zoom and talk. So like, these PIs are, they work really hard and they publish these papers. And when you guys reach out to them and say, hey, I've read your work, I'm really interested in what you do, they're truly so flattered. And so just keep that in the forefront of your mind, that they are flattered and excited to hear from you, and to not be afraid of doing that. Got some more questions coming in here. Let me just move my screen. Okay, so one question in here, and an important one I wanted, that I haven't had a chance to mention, and I want to reiterate, is one of our attendees wants to know if we are willing to serve as mentors for our attendees, and additionally, if specific students are interested in the medical track, if we could get them in contact with someone. And so to answer that, absolutely, that's absolutely what we're here for. And so I'm going to go, if any of the other panelists want to, we can drop our personal emails in the chat if you guys want to reach out to us individually. And you can also email our NGSD Gmail account as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. So we're happy to hear from you guys at any time with questions about, our neuroscience program, or just any, just grad school at all.
Wait, Nancy, did you drop the NGSD Gmail already?
Oh, I did not. Could you do that? And can any of the other panelists, I think we got another question in at the bottom, but I'm having trouble seeing it on my screen. If any of you would like to read it out so we can answer it, that would be great.
Yeah, so one of the attendees wants to know, is it ever too early to email? For example, if I am a 3rd-year student, should I wait until my 4th year closer to when I am applying?
I would say it's never too early. I think that it's actually better maybe to email earlier, because then you really get a sense of like exactly what you want to do, and you can really understand like each program that you may be interested in. And sometimes like when we wait until the 4th year, it's kind of like crunch time almost, because you're doing everything at once. So I think that really just being organized and knowing what you want, like even in your 3rd year, is like amazing. And yeah, I would definitely start emailing then. I think that's important.
Yeah, and especially because, like, as we kind of highlighted, if you're planning to apply soon after your 4th year, you're already going to have a lot on your plate between not only your senior classes, but then also having to get ready for the GRE, having to start preparing the applications themselves. It's a lot to process all at once. So having already sent out those emails and started figuring out your interests is just going to make your life easier, I think, in the long run.
I think also, I can't like personally speak to this too much, but like the earlier you reach out, the more likely that there's going to be like some unique opportunities for funding where, a PI might respond and be like, actually, we have an early deadline that's not advertised for students that meet XYZ criteria. So like just starting that line of communication is like never hurts, especially like everyone has said, like very professionally, and you just explain who you are and like what's going on. Like they love to help, right? That's like why those things exist.
All right, and then for our final question, since for any of our audience members who may be already applying to graduate school and having to conduct their interviews over Zoom, what advice do you guys have for interviewing in this format?
So actually, my interview for Drexel, I was living in Vermont at the time, and there was a massive blizzard, and so I was interviewed over Skype. But unfortunately, they could see me, but I couldn't see them. So the entire time, I just kind of stared at the little green dot on my webcam and like pretended like I was making eye contact and just kind of kept smiling. But I think so. Roll with the punches. Try to be like flexible and understanding, and then try to like let yourself come through as much as possible. What was kind of weird with my interview, weird on my end, was that they asked what my hobbies were, and then I literally was like, I stalled and came up with something super random and forgot all of my hobbies. So make sure you just like take a deep breath, and they're not trying to like see you fail in an interview. They're just usually curious about things. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll kind of go off of that. So I haven't had that experience, and my interview was in person. But I think obviously it's important to still like look nice, like look professionally, which I think is a given. But also, like Michaela said, like really let yourself come through. And even if you have to write stuff down that may like are, you know, typical interview questions, and just like write yourself notes, that could be helpful, because I think a lot of what happens over Zoom is people kind of like black out. Like I know even when I like have given presentations, like I literally present all the time, just from being in grad school, but over Zoom, like I will black out and not remember like half the stuff that I said. And it's just like important that, you know, if that does happen, you're somewhat prepared and you have, you know, what you want to say kind of directly in front of you. But also, you know, take the time beforehand. And if there's something that you can do to kind of like relax yourself, or like, I don't know, meditate or listen to like your favorite song or something of that sort, I think it could be really helpful, because that the interviews, you know, it's a stressful situation. And it's not easy to like remain calm. Usually you're like sweating a little bit. So I think it's really important to do what you can, to calm yourself, and just, you know that you got it no matter what, and have the notes in just in case you black out a little bit.
So I interviewed in person, but there's actually a lot of resources online of types of questions that are normally asked in the PhD interviews, not exactly, but gives you a gist, so that then you can kind of think about how you would answer them honestly in your benefit. So like being yourself, and then kind of like jotting down these thoughts, organizing, and then also I will say, like, I went through to each PI differently for an interview. I don't know if they do that in Zoom where you have one-on-one, then go to the next one, but it helped me just to write a couple notes or like bullet points of what the person's research was, what I liked about it, so that as I was about to do the interview, I'm like, okay, I'm interviewing with this person. This is what they do. This is how I feel. This aligns with me, just to get rid of some of that nervousness.
Yeah, and I would also say this doesn't really apply to like Zoom interviews, but just in general, this is something I tell all people applying to graduate school. If you were offered an interview, it's because they think you are qualified to be in that program. And so you really just need to kind of wash those fears away that like they're trying, you know, they're going to reveal something about you that, you know, like, I don't know, but just they invited you there because they already think you're qualified to be there. So you don't have to be nervous about your credentials, and, you know, they've read their application and they've invited you thus far. So they just want to get to know you. And normally, I mean, I can say this about our neuroscience program. I can't necessarily say everybody views the interview process that way, but I know our program is just trying to see if you'd be a good fit with us, and just to see if you would like being here, really. And so it's not a test or a trick. They really just want to chat with you as a person and see what you're interested in and all about. So another question just came in. And so this is any recommended questions to ask the people interviewing you. That's a great question. I normally, like Christina mentioned, had some research specific questions. So normally a lot of programs ask you who you want to interview with, and then you get a schedule ahead of time. So you should know going in who you're going to speak with. And so you can kind of prepare accordingly by kind of reading up on their websites and about research specific questions. I didn't ask this question myself, but I've heard someone else give this advice. A friend of mine, she asked a question. She asked the people interviewing her, if you could change one thing about your program, what would it be? I think that's a really great question, because you're also interviewing them. You want to see if this is a place you want to go, if this is, and so don't forget that you can use this time like to ask questions, like, to ask your questions, like how do you feel your students are best supported? I think it's great to ask PIs what their mentoring philosophy is like. What like a typical like weekly interaction is like with one of their PhD students, for example. So those are some of the thoughts that I have. Anyone else want to jump in there?
I definitely had a lot of questions I for grad students. So the PIs, mine were more research based questions to them, but I did have quite a few questions. I know I drove Taylor crazy. I did have a little notebook with questions and for the grad students, because they're the ones in the program. They know how it really is. You want to make sure, are they happy? Are their needs met? Different mentoring styles of each PI. And so I found that very helpful talking to grad students, like definitely reaching out to grad students.
I think that's a great thing to bring up, Christina, because if you interview at Drexel, for example, our program just happens to integrate students into the interview process, because that's what our program does. And so we give our interviewees a chance to ask those questions to the students. But if you find yourself in a program where you don't get that opportunity, maybe you're only doing these Zoom interviews with PIs, more often than not, they list their graduate students on their websites, and you can find their emails there. And I would encourage you all, if you don't get the opportunity provided to you in the interview to talk with students, to really reach out to them, because just like Christina said, they have the real inside scoop. They'll tell you what the pros and cons are of working for their PI. They'll be honest with you. And so in addition to having those interviews with the PIs, having those contacts with the grad students as well is very, very helpful. So unless another question comes in, and I'll give it a moment, that was our last question of the evening. And so I think Michaela has dropped our registration for our third panel in the chat here. And so I really encourage you all to join us next week. I know you guys may all be at various career stages, and there is no bad time to get research experience. And so next week, we're just going to really talk about how you can get involved in STEM research and various opportunities to do that. And hopefully you all got our emails in the chat as well. I also really want to reiterate that we would love nothing more than to serve as your mentors and kind of guide you through this process of becoming neuroscientists. I know like Taylor, Michaela, and myself have all talked to potential students and read their personal statements and things like that. And so everyone in our program just really wants to kind of foster this next generation of neuroscientists and help them achieve their goals. So we thank you guys all for attending today. We really hope that you join us next week and look out for a survey for some feedback about how our panel goes and anything that we can do to improve. We really appreciate you guys attending. Thank you.